Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. This is Tears, Not Tears, Contextualizing Cyber Threats. I'm Rachel Beck. I work at Rangeforce. We are the company that is hosting this webinar. And today we have a great presentation for you. I'm going to hand it off to Tanner in just a moment, but first, just a couple of housekeeping things. One, this is a live webinar. We are here live. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box in there and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Tanner Howell, who is our Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at Rangeforce. And he is battling a little bit of some illness. So please be patient with some of the fatigue you might hear in his voice. Tanner is usually about a level 11. He might be a level 10 today. So Tanner, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, let me share my screen. Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome, everybody. Like Rachel said, my name is Tanner. I head up Solutions Engineering here at Rangeforce. And like Rachel said, I am getting over a little bit of a cold. To quote a employee of mine, I, quote, caught a virus at Black Hat. So I will be stuffy nose and all guiding you on this talk today, but I think we'll get through it okay. So like Rachel said, the topic for today is Tears, Not Tears, and it's all about contextualizing cyber threats. Now, let's dive into it right away. Now, for those of you who have joined us in previous webinars, this slide might look a little familiar, but I always like to start every conversation like this on something we can all agree on, which is cyber attacks are getting worse all the time, and they're only going to get worse. With the emergence of AI, with threat actor groups continuously advancing, we expect cybercrime to grow 15% over the next 5 years and to hit $10.5 trillion. So this is something that isn't going away. But that's something, again, that we can all agree on. I do have a little bit more recap for those of you who are rejoining us. For those of you who are new to us, you're going to hear me use the word cyber readiness a lot in the presentation. At Rangeforce, we use this term a lot to talk about the ability of your team to protect your organization. Ultimately, we use the phrase detect, disrupt, and defend. But if you hear me use the phrase readiness or cyber readiness or defensive readiness, what I'm talking about is your team's defensive posture and ability to handle these threats. It's all about, in our eyes, preparedness and drilling and measuring that ability before you're in an incident. But with that, let's dive into the core concept of today's session. So, when we say tiering, that can mean quite a few different things. We could be talking about the tierness of your organization's posture. We could talk about the way that it starts with security awareness, then moves to detection, and then responsibility and mitigation. But in today's sense, we are taking the approach of how do you tier a threat actor by their offensive capability, and how do you tier your defensive team off of their defensive capability. And we believe to hit true optimization of incident response readiness or investment, if you will, you have to be tiering both sides. So here's an example of a different threat actor tiering, or an example threat actor tiering. You can see here that we broke it into 5 chunks. Level 1 being a script kiddie, think little Billy down the street going on the internet for the first time, or the dark web for the first time, downloads some ransomware as a service and sends it to a mom and pop shop down the street. But then as we move up these tiers, we start getting more and more and more sophisticated. Now, MITRE ATT&CK has a compendium of all cyber adversary actions. And one thing to think about is, as we move up these tiers, there are more and more and more attack techniques that are being used by these threat actors. So for example, if we look at tier 5, you're going to see those very, very sophisticated techniques. Where at tier 1, you're not going to see as many of those sophisticated techniques. Now, there's a multitude of different ways that we can get actionable intel or actionable actions, if you will, on these different tiers. That might be your threat intel service. That might be strategic vendors. That may be a designated resource on your team doing research on these groups. But ultimately, the idea here being is that if you focus on different, if you put different threat actors into buckets, you're able to break them out by capability and the type of defensive skills you would need to mitigate them. I lost my mouse. There we go. Now, those of you watching at home, you're probably thinking in your head, okay, Tanner, but everything should be the top tier. For some organizations, that's tier 1. Some organizations, that's tier 5. Regardless, I came from a SOC like this. We need to treat every alert, every type of incident like it is a nation state. We need to keep our skills sharp. And I get it, right? We want to have the best cybersecurity team possible. We want to be able to say, no matter if it's a junior analyst or senior analyst, they're going to handle every incident the exact same way and treat it with the exact same gravitas just in case it is a nation state threat actor. And here's the thing, though. When everything's priority 1, nothing is. And so then you end up having, we have priority 1, but then there's priority 0. That's even bigger. And you end up basically creating a tiering system on top of a tiering system. And the other thing, too, is we run the risk of burning out our analysts. According to Forrester, they did a study of around 1,000 cybersecurity teams, 1,000 security analysts in security teams across the US and Europe. They found 64% of security team members responded to the survey saying stress had affected their productivity. 64%. So 2/3 of security analysts that responded to this survey said that they had such significant stress that it impacted their ability to do their job effectively. Now, where this gets, in my opinion, scarier is when you look in the statistics that aren't listed on this slide. 51% had been prescribed medication for their mental health that they correlated back to their day job. And 19% of analysts responding to the survey consumed more than 3 drinks a day to deal with their stress. So if we think about this, right, security by default is a very stressful job. Nobody wants their company to be on the front page of the paper. Nobody wants to be the analyst who misses an alert. Nobody wants to be an analyst who, doesn't take something as seriously as they should have. Nobody wants to be the security leader who, kind of waved their hand off and said, let's not investigate that. But by doing that, by having that type of constant diligence, we're making it so that our teams are inevitably going to make mistakes. They're going to mess up. They're going to burn themselves out. And it's out of scope for this conversation today, but analyst burnout, analyst churn is a huge problem in the cybersecurity space. So now that I've done a little bit of the problem statement, if you will, let's think about why we haven't taken a tiered type of approach before. Now, the thing is that there's a saying, nobody ever got fired for buying X vendor, right? Nobody ever lost their job, lost their team by taking this hyper diligent approach. And so, to quote Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, the most dangerous phrase in our language is, we've always done it this way. Yes, we haven't historically broken out our teams or our threats before, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. There isn't an industry standard for this. So today we will be using Range Force's proprietary Defense Readiness Index. For those of you who are familiar with us, this should be familiar. For those of you who aren't as familiar with us, the Defense Readiness Index is a numeric representation of the capability of a team to defend against threat actors, and it's a numeric representation of threat actor sophistication. And here's a visual version of that instead of me waving my hands around and painting a visual or a verbal picture. And I know this is a dense slide. We'll be revisiting this slide throughout the presentation, but I just want to highlight that there are 5 levels in DRI. They start at opportunistic threat actors, and then they progress in more and more sophistication until you're hitting strategic, high-level nation-state threat actors. When we're thinking about the amount of time threat actors are spending on every target, DRI 1, they're spending less than 1 hour. They're buying something off the shelf, where it continues to increase 1 hour per effort, 10 hours of effort, 100, and then over 1,000 hours of effort. So you can see here that just by looking at how much time it takes per machine to, or how much time it takes to breach the environment or construct a breach, if you will, you're able to group that malware into DRI levels. You're able to group threat actors into those DRI levels. And then when we look down here at the defensive capabilities required, you're able to get an idea of what defensive capabilities are needed. So you can see here, for example, most automated machine detection with signature-based endpoints are going to be able to detect and mitigate a DRI level 1, whereas to mitigate a DRI level 4 type of attack, you are going to have advanced threat detection capabilities. So it gets exponentially more and more sophisticated. And I guess to better visualize that, here's a graphic we made. So for each tier, more capability is required. And we break them out by 3 types. The first one being vendor capability. So those are your turnkey, off the shelf. I just bought this tool. It's got some pre-configuration, and I don't have to do anything. Think about your preloaded alerts, for example, in your SIM or EDR tool when you buy it. And then we talk about basic skills. That's going to be your, your fundamental understanding of how to leverage your tools. Kind of think of it as, I know, I guess to tie into the SIM analogy, I know how to build an alert for my SIM. And then we start talking about applied skills, and that's the more advanced stuff. For example, proactive threat hunting, advanced malware analysis, stuff like that. So you're able to show, or this graphic is able to show that to get to those higher defensive levels, you have to be doing more than at these lower levels. So there's a lot of granularity in this. There's a lot to it. And the question you're probably asking is, how do I choose the right level for me and my organization, right? Where is that right point for me and my team? Now, again, we talked about this earlier. I care about every threat. Every threat is priority 1. But in reality, that's not a scalable model. What's also not scalable is to worry about, for example, old malware from 10 years ago that is in every AV tool. Is it worth having your team stress and sift through every log to make sure that the AV log had caught it? Or do you trust your AV tool? Conversely, if you send someone to a security conference and there's a researcher there who shows, I went ahead of myself, who shows a novel breach that they spent 5,000 to 10,000 hours crafting with their team, is that something that your team should really be worrying about in your environment, or is a neat thing to keep your eye on? Someday a threat actor may use this, but it's not worth deconstructing and sifting through every log to make sure that you're okay. Obviously, neither of these, and these were meant to be 2 extremes, are good day-to-day worries for the team. So the most common principle to think of when you're looking at your level you want to be at is the prevalence. What are you most likely to be targeted against, and where are you going to see the biggest ROI for your team? Now I'll go to this slide. So I know I've been very abstract in this conversation today, so I'm going to kind of bring it down a little bit. We're going to do a couple of case studies. The first company, so we're going to do 2 types of case studies. We're going to do company case studies, and then we're going to do malware case studies. Now, these company case studies, we're going to do 2 of them, as you can see, and we're going to do 2 types of organizations. The first one we're going to look at is a medium-sized nonprofit. We're going to say they have 1,300, 1,350 employees. They have a dedicated security practice, but those guys also have to wear separate hats sometimes and help with other functions. And they also have some outsourced threat detection capability. The second company we'll be looking at is a Fortune 500 financial. So think a 20,000 employee organization. They have 15 dedicated analysts. They have a MSP augmentation They have malware deconstruction and analysis capabilities and multiple different threat feeds. So if we look at case one here, they're going to, and obviously there's more to this than just waving a wand and saying there's three, but ultimately, to skip to the end, this team would land at a DRI 3. Let's take a step back and think about why. Well, first things first, they're a lower profile organization. That's not to say they're not important, but this isn't the type of company that you would see in the news every day. They're doing great work. Again, they're nonprofit. That's awesome. But they're not going to be your Googles, your Amazons, those types of companies that have the very high visibility that a threat actor would go for when crafting a sophisticated threat. Their data might not be as sensitive. Yes, they're going to have maybe some PI&I from donations they've received, but they're not going to have, for example, manufacturing data. They're not going to have, IP that a nation state type threat actor would be targeting. And ultimately, they're going to have a lower ROI uh, for the time investment from an attacker standpoint, right? If you spend thousands and thousands of hours crafting a bespoke threat, you want to make sure that you're getting something meaty out of it, something that you can take and sell on the black market, something that you can, exploit for a ransom, or not exploit, sorry, extort for a ransom. So ultimately, this company would be landing at a moderate defensive posture. They need to be worried about hacktivists. For example, some nonprofits are targeted by hacktivists, but typically, activists don't have the level of sophistication to do these very, very advanced breaches. They're going to need to worry about your commodity e-crime. Think about your known threat actors, the types of groups that CrowdStrike talks about. Those types of, those types of threats. Yes, absolutely. And I'm not here to say this group would never be a victim of a cyber attack. I'm not here to say that they would never be breached. What I'm trying to say is we are stating, in general terms, obviously every organization is different, but this type of organization would see a higher ROI investing in a tier 3 or a DRI 3 capability. I'm not going to drain this slide, but what I really wanted to talk about is just how much goes into that. So, you see, they landed at a 3, they're only at the midpoint. Yes, but that doesn't mean they're not having a strong security posture. These organizations are going to have a SIM and EDR. They're going to have threat intel. They're going to have some sort of automation around not junior, but basic type threats. They're going to have some sort of vision for their security team. It's not just going to be one guy in a dark room with the lights off. It's going to be some sort of practice, whether those individuals wear multiple hats or not. And it's, for lack of a better phrase, there's still a lot that goes into being DRI level 3. And to give it a visual representation, so just because this team is at DRI 3 doesn't mean they don't care about DRI 2 or 1 as well. So by being at DRI level 3, inherently they already have covered those types of threats. So again, rather than think about it as they landed at the midpoint, think of it as they covered everything up to DRI 3. And again, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't see any value investing in DRI 4 or 5 defensive capabilities. It's that they would have the biggest return on their investment at DRI 3 and below. Now, for case number 2, looking at a Fortune 500, obviously an organization like this is going to have a very aggressive defensive posture, which is a funny sentence to say out loud. And the reason may be multiple reasons, right? They may be a regulated industry. They may have sensitive data. They could be high profile. Think your very large financials that we all know the names of. That's the type of feather in the cap that a threat actor wants. Oh, we breached this company and we got this out of it. They're very high value. They might have very sensitive data that can be exploited or extorted. They may have, money. There might be the ability to steal money. There might be the ability to steal IP. If you think about your large manufacturing companies, there could be a sensitive IP that only they have, that a nation may want, or a malicious threat actor may want, in order to sell to their nation. We all know about the multiple highly sophisticated breaches that have been involved just around stealing some sort of IP. So basically, if you're a Fortune 500 or a government, you probably land at DRI 5. And then, so again, just to show how much goes into this, and obviously I ran out of space on the slide here, but everything in those lower tiers is in DRI 5. And then you're starting to talk about very sophisticated things like a dedicated cyber range, tabletops, a dedicated training program, behavioral detection mechanisms, so on and so forth. So much goes into this. This is your very, very, very large teams. And frankly, a lot is needed to protect against DRI 5. That's why so few organizations are here. It's really, again, I know I've said this like 5 times, your governments, your large financials, your large manufacturers, so on and so forth. And then to give that visual representation, when you're at DRI 5, you're covering everything. So you have, behavioral and advanced threat detection. You have deep manual analysis of the environment, and then everything below that as well. So we've talked about it a lot from the business side, but let's talk about how it translates into threats. So we'll do a couple malware case studies. I do want to put a caveat up front. While we will be doing these case studies, 1, in the interest of time, and 2, because we chose very well-known case studies that are well documented with a lot of literature, we're not going to dive so much into the weeds, but we're going to talk about them from a broad stroke standpoint. So with that, we'll talk about Colonial Pipeline. And Colonial Pipeline landed at a DRI-3 type of attack. Now, that may be surprising to some because, that this cybersecurity attack caused a run on gas on the entire eastern seaboard. It was very high profile, but this is a good example of just because an attack is high profile doesn't mean it's DRI 5. This, frankly, is a preventable type of attack. It was originally not propagated, that's not the right word. It was kicked off, I guess, via exposed credentials. It was a ransomware as a service variant. It was a known threat actor. And it was a known ransomware as a service variant as well. Ultimately, it was a devastating attack. But it wasn't a highly sophisticated attack. And if I go to the next example I have here, which is the SolarWinds breach, this is the example or an example of what I mean when I say a sophisticated attack. And when we look at this one, we're looking at a completely bespoke breach. This threat actor spent months with their hands in the network, moving around very stealthily. It was a company specific attack, not even an industry, not even a vertical, not even a regional, if you will. And there was, and I know I said this already, but driving it again, a high level of threat actor sophistication post breach. And I highly recommend you guys, if you haven't read about these in a couple years, or I know these ones are a little, I don't want to call them dated because they're still high profile and still matter today. But we chose these ones on purpose because these are well documented. I highly recommend you read about them and think about them from what type of defensive tiering capability you would have. And then to tie it back to the graphic one last time. So again, thinking about the Colonial Pipeline one, that was, it was altered, right? It was a DRI level 3 attack. But then when we look at the SolarWinds one, it was a completely bespoke attack. So I know we're wrapping up here. I know I picked up the pace a little bit. I want to make sure we have some time for some questions. But the lesson here is that we need to tier threats. We need to think about what type of threats our organizations will face in a realistic manner. We need to prioritize our cybersecurity investment in a way where we'll get the greatest ROI. And ultimately, we need to make sure that we are equipping our teams to be as successful as possible. With that, I will turn it over to questions.
All right. Thank you, Tanner. We do have a couple of questions here. And if anyone else has some questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in that chat box there. So first of all, doesn't a company also have to consider its obligations to partner companies? It could be contractual or implicit when choosing their level of readiness. Supply chain attacks using third parties are a real problem.
So the short answer is absolutely, right? And that's part of the business side of the equation, right? And I didn't dive into it too much on this one, but really when you're picking your organization's defensive level, there's two parts of that. There's the what type of threats are we being targeted, and then what type of posture do we need to have in order to do business. So yes, that is a great point out, I guess, for lack of a better way to say that, because yeah, we have to be thinking about what we need to be projecting from a defensive posture in order to do business. Nobody wants to be the vendor that gets their customers affected. Nobody wants to be affected by any vendors that they have. So yes, it is absolutely everybody's business, no doubt about it.
All right. Here's another one for you. How does this type of thinking factor into investment, headcount, tools, etc.?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So it really ties into the different tier you land at, right? So for example, if you land, let's say, at a DRI level 3, well, you probably don't need to really spend a ton. Obviously you'll still spend some, but you won't need to spend a ton of resources on, you know, the capability to do hyper advanced detection and response. You'll get that better ROI at your level 3 type of investment. So your now I'm blanking what was in level 3 because I'm starting to get the illness brain again, but you're going to get the higher ROI at that level. It doesn't mean that you're, wasting your time at that higher level, but if you're focusing on the level that you're at, right, and building that up, you will see your team perform better. You'll see your posture, if you will, be better entrenched than if you try to do too many things at once.
I think that's all of the questions that we have. So we will let Tanner get back to his tea. And thank you everyone for attending. This is the last webinar that we will be having for this calendar year, but we will be having more starting up in the new year in 2024. So please do keep an eye out, and we will be sending the recording to your inbox shortly. Thank you.